Good evening. I am your creepy consular, and this is the Vale, an in-between where I reside, ever present and ever watchful of travelers, not unlike yourself, who wish to travel to the other side. But please, remember my advice. If you feel uneasy, or if they notice you at any point, run, and I will open the veil for you again. Tonight's story is brought to us by Groovy, and it is titled, I Saw Something in the Woods of Nova Scotia, Canada. I need to know what it was. This is a story I haven't really told anyone. Geez, if it weren't for my best friend being present when it happened, I probably would have gaslit myself into believing it was a nightmare, or I was just going plain nuts. It's one of those memories that, no matter how much time goes by, you never forget. The details don't get muddy for even a moment. It was 2012, my freshman year of high school. I was 15 years old and had been in the company of my best friend that night. Let's call her Marie. We lived in a fairly small town on the eastern coast of Canada, Nova Scotia to be exact. It was an old mining community, sat in the middle of the woods, to paint a picture for you. There wasn't really much to do. Our economy had tanked many moons before the rest of the country, so outside of hard drugs or crime, all you really had to do was walk around. Marie and I just so happened to have made walking a bit of a natural pastime. We'd properly mapped out the entire town and its surrounding hills and forests. In rain, shine, sleet, or snow, we'd seen everything of our little community had to offer, from its vast range of wildlife to its colorful selection of junkies. Please, keep these tidbits in mind before you tell me what we saw was an animal or a human. It was an autumn night with nothing more for two high school girls to do, and homework not being something we specialized in. We decided to go on one of our many town walks. This night, in particular, had us go a little off the beaten trail. You see, typically, we'd have stuck to the main roads, probably ended up at Tim Hortons before calling it a night and heading back home. But not tonight. Tonight, we decided to walk by the food bank. You might be wondering what the draw of an old food bank is. You see, it wasn't just a food bank. Back when we were still a mining town, our food bank was a train station. Trains would come by and pick up coal that was freshly dug from the coal mines and take it all across the country. The old train yard was still there. Its now rust-covered cars acting as mock tombs to a much more prosperous era gone by. We'd frequented the train yard with our friends in the past, climbing the cars, sneaking inside, among other things that could have gotten kids hurt. So it wasn't a new place to us at all. And we thought that since it was at the tree line, tucked away in a quiet enough part of town, that we could freely walk and chat without the concern of traffic or the like. Sidewalks weren't very frequent on that side of town. The sun had already set as we made our way down the long stretch of road. That October chill grasping at our small frames like glue. while the all too familiar autumn smell of still dying plant life had permeated the air. We were talking to each other about what teenage girls typically babble about: boys, Facebook, you know, real important stuff. We had been so caught up in our conversation of the most dire importance that by the time we made it to the fence that lined the train yard, it genuinely took us a moment to notice the noise. It was a very clear scream. We stopped dead in our tracks and began to stare at each other, not so much out of fear, but bewilderment. It didn't quite sound like an animal, but it definitely didn't sound human either. I've gotten up close and personal with enough cougars, wolves, and toddlers to know that this screaming we were hearing was caught somewhere in between man and beast. We stood there, glaring into each other's eyes for a few more seconds before finally turning our attention towards the sound. It was dark, mind you, not pitch black, as there were some street lights around, though few and far between, but we couldn't see anything. To us, from where we were standing, it was just an old train station turned food bank. A rusted out fence and a couple of unused and falling apart train cars. The screams didn't subside as we were now staring into the foreground of what became a series of mental photographs of the area. It was then I realized that just up ahead, the third and final train car sat partially covered from our viewpoint by a few bushes. I had turned my head to Marie, a mischievous grin dawning on my face like a cowl. "Last one to the train car has to buy the French vanillas," I exclaimed before quickly jogging along the side of the fence towards the final car. I heard Marie call out, "Hey, wait up," as my feet clearly were acting before my brain. I mean, gosh, this could have been some wild animal or really anything, and I was just running into blind. I'm not particularly a brave person, and I'm honestly not sure why I did this, or anything else that happens from here on out. I rounded the fence. The screaming got louder and louder as I strode closer and closer. My heart began to race with both anxiety and sheer excitement. I wasn't sure what I was even getting myself into, or what I was expecting to see at all. Needless to say, about a second later, the ever-increasing beating from my chest has come to a standstill, as my heart had made itself a new home in my throat. I stopped so quickly, Marie slammed right into the back of me, but I was so frozen in fear at what I was now looking at that I barely even budged. The screaming still echoing off the forest so loudly, I could barely hear the faint whisper of an "Oh my God" escape Mary's lips. No more than about 20 feet away from us, crouched just under the train car, was a pale, hairless, and naked person. It was just sitting there under the front of the car, screaming into the darkness of the autumn night. Each time it screamed, its arms would leer forward from under the car. They extended out to an unnatural length, almost like 2 tree branches. We both stood there, frozen in a mixture of fear and confusion. What were they doing? Were they hurt? On drugs? A million questions began to race through my head, and one look at Marie's face had told me the same questions were racing through her mind as well. We must have stood there just watching in complete awe for what felt like 5 minutes. But realistically, it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, maybe a minute at the most. That's when, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to take a few steps closer. I took my first shaky step towards it. I felt Marie's hand grasp my arm as if to say, "Don't." But it was clear that her fear outweighed her functionality as I easily broke free from her grip just by continuing forward. I had closed about 5 or so feet of distance before stopping. I continued to stare at it from my position for another moment before clearing my throat and stammering the words, Hey, are you okay?" The second I said those words, any thought of this being a person in need of help had flown out the window and dissipated in the cool nighttime air. Almost as if someone had hit stop on a recording. The screaming it had been happy to emit had ceased, and then it was staring at us. You need to understand, it didn't seem to even move its head. It was just 1 second staring forward into the night, and the next right back towards us. A faint growl began to seep into the area now from where it was positioned, as I took in the details of its face, in which I had become sure it wasn't human. It had a mouth that seemed to take up the width of most of its face, like a thin crack in a slab of concrete. Its eyes were small, but almost glowed in the darkness with the most piercing yellow I have ever seen. After it had taken its time to mimic our staring back at us, its crack-like mouth had almost cartoonishly curled into a smiling man-like grin, its lips parting to reveal its long, jagged, and razor-like teeth. The beast and I continued, locked into this war of attrition, though it was admittedly clearly more confident in being the dominant one in the exchange of looks. It broke the stare down after another moment, bringing its long, twiggy arms up from under the train car. It wrapped its fingers around the lip of the car and at a near breakneck speed kicked itself out from under the train car with a swing, almost like a chimpanzee leaping from one tree branch to another before landing and planting itself on the ground in a pose akin to that of a frog. It continued to, its gaze which now had begun to feel as though I was being sized up. My whole body had been shaking at what was akin to Mach 5. I tried to avert my eyes, look anywhere else as it felt like any moment I would pass out in sheer terror, but I was drawn in. It felt almost like it had me in some sort of trance. I watched as it slowly began to stand, unfurling itself from the position it was in. It just seemed to get taller and taller until what I was looking at was at its full stance, its entire body a pasty gray. Its arms had drooped down well past its knees, and its legs hooked in the back near the calf, almost like a goat. The words "I'm not religious" in the slightest, though I was raised Catholic in my younger years, and the only words I can think to muster were "Hail Mary, full of grace," as I began to pray and stared down what I was sure was my end. The creature then leered itself forward, throwing its arms back as its jaws unhinged itself from its skull and dropped down to it about its collarbones, as it let out one final shriek, the noise embedding itself in my brain and making sure not to ever leave, to forever haunt my nightmares along with the image. I closed my eyes so tight, my head began to hurt. I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks, with my lips pierced close so tightly that not even a breath could escape them. And then, nothing. Silence. Deafening silence. Was it over? That quickly? Was I dead? I slowly opened up one eye, peeking out. I saw it, a final look. It had retaken its crouching position, giving us its final glance as well, before it turned its back to us. An encounter that had felt like it lasted hours, and then swiftly ended in that of a few mere seconds, as the creature leapt from its position to the tree line, and then one final leap into the woods. Just like that, it had vanished. I had almost all but forgotten Marie was still there, until the softness of her voice had brought me back to earth, with a, "Kenzie, what the fuck was that?" I turned to her. Her skin had gone sheet white and her eyes were red with tears. My legs had finally given out from sheer exhaustion of it all, as I had fallen to my knees, Marie quickly running over and catching me in an embrace as we silently wept. I'm not sure too much of what happened after that. It's all a blur, really. I told some people at first, but they were quick to laugh me off as a liar, or that I was simply being over-imaginative. With Marie moving away about a year later and my only witness having gone, that didn't help my credibility. It's been 10 years since then. I no longer live in Nova Scotia, and actually live in the same town as my best friend Marie again. We still bring this up to each other every now and again, but refrain from telling most anyone else out of fear of being labeled crazy. My last words I'd like to say are pretty blunt. If you live in Nova Scotia, Canada, please be careful. There is something living in the woods, and it is not human.